We have all been taught that rejection hurts, that failure diminishes us, that pain is something to be avoided and overcome as quickly as possible. You have been misled. Rejection does not weaken you. It reveals exactly who you are and who you are not. Failure does not destroy your potential. It exposes the difference between who you think you are and who your actions prove you to be. Pain is not the problem. Your refusal to extract its lessons is the problem. The strong don't avoid these experiences. They don't just survive them. They turn them into fuel, clarity, and mastery. It's not about resilience. It's about alchemy, the secret process that turns your worst moments into your greatest advantages. Everything else is avoidance pretending to be healing. Chapter 1. Rejection is data, not judgment. You have been rejected. Maybe yesterday, maybe last week, maybe last year, and you're still carrying it. You're still replaying it. You are still letting it tell you something about your worth. And that is the problem, not the rejection itself, your interpretation of what it means. Because rejection is not judgment. Rejection is data. And until you learn to treat it as data, you will stay wounded by information that should be making you stronger. Here is the fundamental misinterpretation that keeps you wounded. Most people treat rejection as a verdict on their worth. Someone says no to your proposal, and you hear you are not good enough. Someone ends the relationship, and you hear you are not lovable. Someone passes on your idea, and you hear you are not valuable. But that is not what rejection says. Rejection says there is misalignment, wrong timing, wrong audience, wrong approach, or wrong version of yourself. That is all. That is the only information rejection contains. But you're making it mean more. You're taking precise information about compatibility and converting it into vague feelings about your value. You're taking strategic intelligence and drowning it in emotional interpretation. And that conversion is destroying you. Because when you treat rejection as judgment, you cannot use it. You can only survive it. You can only try to heal from it. You can only wait for the wound to close. And while you wait, the actual information rejection was trying to give you goes unused. That is the key. Rejection is not attacking you. Rejection is informing you. It is telling you with perfect clarity that this connection, this opportunity, this path is not calibrated to where you actually are or where you are actually going. And that information is valuable. That information saves you months or years of pursuing something that was never aligned. But you cannot access that value if you are too busy being wounded by the delivery. You have a choice. You can continue treating rejection as a statement about your worth and stay stuck in the emotional aftermath. Or you can start treating rejection as information about alignment and use it to refine your direction. But you cannot do both. And right now, your emotional interpretation is preventing you from extracting the strategic value. Think about the last time you were rejected. Really rejected. The job you did not get. The person who said no. The opportunity that disappeared. What did you make it mean? If you are honest, you probably made it mean something about you. Something about your capability. Something about your value. Something about whether you are enough. And that meaning has been running in the background ever since. Influencing your confidence. Affecting your decisions. Keeping you small. But what if you were wrong? What if rejection was not a verdict on you? What if it was just information about fit? What if the job rejection meant your skills were not matched to their needs, not that you lack skills? What if the relationship ending meant incompatibility, not that you are unlovable? What if the opportunity disappearing meant wrong timing, not that you are unworthy? Would that change how you carry it? Would that change what you do next? It should, because that is actually what rejection means. But you have been taught to take it personally. You have been taught that when someone says no to you, they are saying no to your value. And that teaching has made you fragile. That teaching has made rejection more powerful than it should be. That teaching has given other people's opinions more weight than your own standards. That is why taking rejection personally is the real failure. When you internalize rejection as a statement about your value, you make someone else's no more important than your own yes. You make their assessment more significant than your own standards. You give them authority over your identity. And that is the failure. Not being rejected, being controlled by rejection, being defined by someone else's no instead of being directed by your own standards. You have a choice. You can continue giving other people's rejections power over your self-perception, or you can reclaim that power by recognizing that their no is just information about alignment, not authority over your worth. One approach keeps you fragile and reactive. The other approach makes you strategic and powerful. Here is what the strong understand that you need to learn. Rejection is often protection from paths, people, and opportunities that would waste your potential. That job you did not get might have kept you in the wrong industry for 5 more years. That relationship that ended might have prevented you from meeting someone actually compatible. That opportunity that disappeared might have distracted you from the better one coming. You do not know. You cannot know. But what you can know is that rejection sorted you away from something that was not aligned. And that sorting is valuable. But you only get that value if you stop taking it personally. You only access that protection if you stop treating every no as a comment on your worth. You only benefit from a sorting mechanism if you trust that rejection is data, not judgment. And right now, your personal interpretation is blocking your strategic use of that data. It is not about pretending rejection does not hurt. It is not about being emotionless. It is about separating the information from the emotion, about extracting what is useful and discarding what is destructive, about treating rejection like feedback instead of like an attack. And that requires a protocol. Here is the protocol for analyzing rejection clinically. When you're rejected, you pause. You do not immediately internalize. You do not immediately interpret. You pause, and you ask 3 questions. First, what specifically was rejected? Not you as a person. What specifically? Your proposal? Your approach? Your timing? Your current skill level? Get specific. Second, is this rejection revealing a misalignment or exposing a gap I need to close? Sometimes rejection means wrong fit. Sometimes it means not ready yet. Know the difference. Third, what adjustments does this information suggest? Different approach? Different audience? Different timing? Different version of myself? Extract the lesson. That is the protocol. 3 questions. Specific rejection. Misalignment or gap. Adjustments indicated. No emotional interpretation. No making it mean something about your worth. Just clinical analysis that produces strategic intelligence. And once you have that intelligence, you implement changes strategically and move forward without emotional baggage. Most people will not do this. Most people will feel the rejection, internalize it, carry it, and let it influence everything they do next. They will become more hesitant, more doubtful, more afraid of the next rejection. And that fear will make them smaller, will make them less likely to attempt anything that might result in rejection, will trap them in a cycle where they avoid rejection by avoiding anything worth doing. But you're not most people. You understand that rejection is not judgment. You understand that every no is information. You understand that the people who succeed are not people who avoid rejection. They are people who collect rejection as data, extract the lessons, adjust, and attempt again without carrying emotional baggage from the previous attempt. You have a choice right now. There is rejection you are still carrying. Rejection you have been treating as a verdict on your worth. And you have a choice. Continue carrying it as a wound, or analyze it as data. Extract the lesson, implement the adjustment, and move forward. Because here is what happens when you reframe rejection from emotional wound to strategic intelligence. You stop being wounded by it. You start being informed by it. You stop avoiding situations where rejection is possible. You start seeking those situations because you understand they contain valuable information. You stop taking no personally. You start using no strategically. And when you make that shift, rejection loses its power over you. Not because you stop experiencing rejection, because rejection stops defining you. It stops controlling you. It stops keeping you small. It becomes what it actually is: data, information, feedback about alignment. And you become someone who uses feedback instead of someone who is broken by it. Your life obeys what you command. But if you are commanding yourself based on emotional interpretations of rejection rather than strategic analysis of data, your commands are distorted. Your commands are shaped by wounds instead of intelligence. And that produces a distorted life. A life organized around avoiding rejection instead of pursuing alignment. You have commanded yourself to understand that rejection is data. Now command yourself to treat it that way. Tonight, identify one rejection you are still carrying emotionally. Apply the 3-question protocol. Extract the lesson. Discard the emotion. And tomorrow, implement one adjustment based on that lesson. That is not theory. That is how you transform rejection from wound into weapon. Rejection is data, not judgment. You learn to separate the two. Now let us talk about the other experience you have been misinterpreting. Chapter 2. Failure is tuition, not punishment. You failed, and you think that failure means something about you. You think it proves you're not capable. You think it confirms your doubts. You think it justifies your fear of trying again. But you are wrong. Failure does not mean you are incapable. Failure means you paid tuition. And the only question is whether you extracted the education you paid for, or whether you just suffered the cost without gaining the knowledge. Here is what you need to understand. Every successful person has paid massive tuition in the form of failures, mistakes, and spectacular crashes. The difference between them and you is not that they failed less. The difference is they treated each failure as a lesson purchased rather than a sentence served. They paid the price and took the education. You pay the price and took the shame. That is the only difference. Same failures, different interpretation, different outcome. That is the key. Failure is tuition, not punishment. When you fail, you're not being punished by the universe. You're not being told you are inadequate. You're being educated. You're learning what does not work. You are discovering gaps in your approach. You are identifying weaknesses in your preparation. You're getting information that success never would have given you. And that information is worth the cost. But only if you extract it. You have a choice. You can continue treating failure as punishment and carry shame from every attempt that does not work. Or you can start treating failure as tuition and extract lessons from every attempt regardless of outcome. But you cannot do both. And right now, your interpretation of failure as punishment is preventing you from collecting the education you have already paid for. Think about your failures. The business that did not work. The relationship that ended. The goal you did not reach. The project that collapsed. How much tuition did you pay? How much time, energy, money, effort did those failures cost you? Now ask yourself honestly, did you extract education equal to the tuition you paid? Did you learn lessons worth the cost? Or did you just feel bad about failing and move on without gaining the knowledge? If you're like most people, you paid massive tuition and took minimal education. You experienced the pain of failure without extracting the value of failure. You suffered the cost without gaining the benefit. And that is the real failure, not the attempt that did not work. The refusal to learn from the attempt. The choice to carry shame instead of knowledge. The decision to be wounded instead of educated. That is why failure is not the problem. Your response to failure is the problem. Failure itself is neutral. Failure is just an outcome, an event, a result that did not match your expectation. But your response to that outcome determines whether it destroys you or develops you, whether it keeps you stuck or moves you forward, whether it becomes a sentence or a semester. It is not about positive thinking. It is not about pretending failure does not hurt. It is about reframing failure as the cost of education, as tuition paid for lessons that success never teaches, as the price you pay to discover what actually works by eliminating what is not. And once you make that reframe, failure stops being something you avoid and starts being something you leverage. Here is what most people do not understand. Failure is the most expensive education you can get. More expensive than any course. More expensive than any degree. More expensive than any mentor. Because failure costs you time, money, effort, reputation, and emotional energy. But it also provides education you cannot get any other way. Education about yourself. Education about reality. Education about what your approach, your assumptions, and your capabilities actually are instead of what you thought they were. And that education is worth the cost, but only if you are willing to sit in the wreckage and extract the lessons. Only if you're willing to analyze what went wrong instead of just feeling bad that it went wrong. Only if you're willing to treat the failure as a learning laboratory instead of a crime scene where you are both victim and criminal. You have a choice. You can continue avoiding failure by playing it safe and guarantee you never learn what failure teaches. Or you can start treating failure as the tuition you pay for the education you need. One approach keeps you comfortable and ignorant. The other approach makes you uncomfortable and educated. Choose carefully. Here is the dangerous comfort of never failing. People who avoid failure do not avoid pain. They just trade the sharp, temporary pain of failure for the dull, permanent pain of unrealized potential. They avoid the discomfort of attempting and failing, but they cannot avoid the discomfort of knowing they never tried. They cannot avoid the pain of looking back and realizing they played it safe their entire life. They cannot avoid the regret of wondering what they could have become if they had been willing to fail. That is the key. Refusing to fail is refusing to learn. And refusing to learn is guaranteeing you will fail at the only thing that actually matters. Becoming who you are capable of becoming. You can avoid small failures by playing small, but you cannot avoid the massive failure of wasted potential. That failure is guaranteed the moment you decide that avoiding failure is more important than attempting growth. You have a choice. Pay the tuition of failure now, while you can still use the education. Or pay the tuition of regret later when the education is worthless because you are out of time. One price is negotiable. The other price is fixed. Choose which tuition you want to pay. Most people choose regret because the tuition is deferred. It does not hurt today. It does not cost anything right now. You can play it safe for years and feel fine. But the bill comes due. And when it comes due, the cost is catastrophic. Because regret is not just pain. Regret is pain plus the knowledge that the pain was optional. That you could have tried. That you could have failed. That you could have learned. That you could have become someone different. But you chose safety over growth. And now you get to live with that choice forever. That is why the strong deliberately fail. Not because they enjoy failure. Because they understand that failing is the cost of learning. That every failure is tuition paid for lessons that move them closer to success. That the person who fails 10 times and learns 10 lessons is infinitely more capable than the person who attempts once, succeeds by luck, and learns nothing. It is not about celebrating failure. It is not about failing for failure's sake. It is about being willing to fail as many times as necessary to extract the education you need to succeed. About treating each failure as one more lesson learned, one more approach eliminated, one more gap identified, one more step closer to the version of yourself who is capable of the success you want. Here is the protocol. Build your failure resume alongside your success resume. Most people only track their wins. They only document their successes. They only remember the times things worked. And that creates a distorted perception of what success requires. It makes success look easy. It makes success look like something that happens to talented people instead of something that is built through repeated failure. But the strong track both. They document their failures as proof of attempts made. They record their crashes as evidence of risks taken. They catalog their mistakes as demonstrations that they are operating at the edge where transformation happens. And that failure resume becomes more valuable than their success resume. Because the failure resume shows the actual work, the actual cost, the actual education. That is the key. Your failures are not shameful secrets to hide. Your failures are credentials that prove you are in the arena, that prove you are attempting things difficult enough to fail at, that prove you're pushing boundaries instead of staying safe. And when you start treating failures as credentials instead of shame, everything changes. You stop hiding your attempts that did not work. You start sharing them as proof that you are doing the work. You have a choice right now. You can continue hiding your failures and pretending you only succeed. Or you can start documenting your failures as proof that you are attempting things worth failing at. One approach makes you look perfect to people who do not matter. The other approach makes you credible to people who do. Here is what happens when you reframe failure as tuition. You stop being afraid of it. You start expecting it. You start budgeting for it. You understand that if you want to learn 10 lessons, you need to pay 10 tuitions. And paying tuition means failing. So you fail deliberately. You fail strategically. You fail as fast as possible so you can learn as fast as possible. And while everyone else is avoiding failure, you are collecting it. While everyone else is playing safe to protect their ego, you're failing forward to build your capability. And that creates an enormous gap between people who are afraid to fail and people who use failure as fuel. Between people who attempt once and quit when it does not work, and people who attempt repeatedly until something does work. Between people who let failure define them and people who let failure refine them. Same failures, different responses, different lives. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are avoid failure at all costs, your life becomes small, safe, and full of regret. If your commands are fail fast, learn faster, and iterate until you succeed, your life becomes expansive, dangerous, and full of capability earned through lessons extracted from every failure. You have commanded yourself to understand that failure is tuition. Now, command yourself to pay it willingly and extract it completely. Tomorrow, identify one failure you've been carrying as shame. Reframe it as tuition. Ask what lessons it taught, what gaps it exposed, what adjustments it suggests. Extract the education, and then apply one lesson from that failure to your next attempt. That is not theory. That is how you transform failure from punishment into power. Failure is tuition, not punishment. You learn to extract the education. Now let us talk about the cost you cannot avoid. Chapter 3. Pain is the price of admission. You want success without suffering. You want mastery without struggle. You want transformation without agony. And that desire is keeping you exactly where you are. Because there is no path to anything meaningful that does not require pain. Pain is not optional. Pain is not negotiable. Pain is the price of admission. And the only question is whether you will pay the price of discipline and growth or the price of regret and stagnation. Here is what you need to understand. All meaningful achievement has a pain cost. The body you want costs the pain of training when you do not feel like it. The business you want costs the pain of uncertainty and risk. The relationship you want costs the pain of vulnerability and honesty. The skill you want costs the pain of sucking at something while you learn it. The financial freedom you want costs the pain of delayed gratification. Everything worth having has a price, and that price is always paid in pain. But you have been trying to negotiate. You have been looking for the path that does not hurt. You have been searching for the shortcut that avoids discomfort. You have been waiting for the method that makes growth easy. And while you search for that non-existent path, people who accepted the pain are already where you want to be. Not because they are special, because they paid the price you're trying to avoid. That is the key. You cannot have the result without paying the cost. You cannot have the transformation without enduring the pain that creates it. You cannot have the life you want while avoiding the discomfort that life requires. The price is fixed. The price is mandatory. And trying to avoid the price is not strategy. It is delusion. You have a choice. You can continue searching for painless growth and stay stuck forever. Or you can accept that pain is the admission price and start paying it. But you cannot do both. And right now, your refusal to pay the price is the only thing preventing you from getting what you want. Think about what you say you want, really want. The goal you claim is important. The transformation you say you are committed to. The life you say you are building toward. Now ask yourself honestly, are you willing to pay the pain that goal requires? Are you willing to endure the discomfort that transformation demands? Are you willing to suffer through the difficulty that life costs? Or are you just willing to want it? Because wanting is free. Wanting costs nothing. Everyone wants, but getting costs pain. And most people are not willing to pay that cost. Most people want the destination without the journey. They want the result without the process. They want the transformation without the pain. And that is why most people stay stuck. Not because they lack desire, because they lack willingness to pay the price their desire requires. It is not about being tough. It is not about enjoying pain. It is about understanding that pain is not optional. Only the type of pain is negotiable. You can choose the pain of discipline now or the pain of regret later. You can choose the pain of growth or the pain of stagnation. You can choose the pain of pushing yourself or the pain of hating yourself for not pushing. But you cannot choose no pain. Pain is guaranteed. Only the source and the payoff are negotiable. Here is why avoiding pain now guarantees worse pain later. The pain of discipline weighs ounces while the pain of regret weighs tons. The discomfort of doing the hard thing today is temporary and productive. The discomfort of looking back and realizing you never did the hard thing is permanent and destructive. Both are painful, but one pain builds you and then releases you. The other pain crushes you and never lets go. That is the mathematics of pain deferral. Every discomfort you avoid today does not disappear. It compounds. It accumulates interest. It grows until the small pain you avoided becomes massive pain you cannot avoid, until the temporary discomfort becomes permanent regret, until the manageable suffering becomes unbearable consequences. Think about the pain you have been avoiding, the conversation you need to have, the change you need to make, the risk you need to take, the work you need to do. That pain is not going away. That pain is growing. Every day you avoid it, it gets larger. Every day you postpone it, it becomes more expensive, until the pain of continuing to avoid it becomes greater than the pain of finally facing it. And by then, the price has multiplied. You have a choice. Pay the pain now while it is small and productive, or pay the pain later when it is massive and destructive. One option hurts today and helps tomorrow. The other option feels better today and destroys tomorrow. Choose carefully, but here is what most people do not understand. Not all pain serves growth. There is a critical distinction you need to make. The distinction between productive pain and destructive suffering. And confusing the two destroys people who think all suffering equals progress. Productive pain is the pain of discipline, the discomfort of training your body beyond its current capacity. the anxiety of attempting something you have never done, the frustration of learning a skill you do not yet have, the vulnerability of having a conversation that matters. This pain is building you. This pain is creating capacity. This pain is forging character. This pain should be embraced, analyzed, and used. Destructive suffering is the pain of self-sabotage. The pain of staying in a toxic relationship because leaving is uncomfortable. The pain of addiction disguised as stress relief. The pain of overtraining without recovery until you injure yourself. The pain of repeating self-destructive patterns while calling it growth. This pain is breaking you. This pain is destroying capacity. This pain is eroding character. This pain should be eliminated immediately. That is the key. You need to recognize the difference between the pain that builds and the pain that destroys. Because if you treat all pain the same, you will either avoid everything uncomfortable and never grow, or you will endure everything painful and destroy yourself. Neither path works. You need discernment. So how do you tell the difference? Productive pain has direction. It points towards something you're building. It moves you closer to who you want to become. It creates capacity over time. Destructive pain has no direction. It repeats without progress. It moves you in circles. It depletes capacity over time. Productive pain makes you stronger in retrospect. Destructive pain makes you weaker regardless of time frame. You have a choice. Continue confusing these two types of pain and either avoid all growth or endure all destruction. Or learn to distinguish between them and embrace productive pain while eliminating destructive pain. One approach keeps you stuck in confusion. The other approach creates strategic suffering that transforms you. Here is the protocol. When you experience pain, you interrogate it. You do not just endure it. You do not just avoid it. You interrogate it. You ask, is this pain building me towards something or breaking me in circles? Is this pain creating capacity or destroying it? Is this discomfort temporary resistance to growth or ongoing damage I am tolerating? And based on that answer, you either lean in or eliminate the source. If it is productive pain, you embrace it. You stay with it. You extract every lesson. You allow it to transform you. You understand that this pain is the price of admission to the next level. And you pay it willingly because you want what is on the other side more than you want to avoid the discomfort. If it is destructive pain, you eliminate it, not by avoiding discomfort, by removing the source of damage. You end the toxic relationship. You stop the harmful pattern. You break the cycle that repeats without progress. You quit the thing that is breaking you while pretending to build you, because you understand that destructive pain is not making you stronger. It is making you weaker while stealing the capacity you need for productive pain. Most people never make this distinction. Most people either run from all pain and call it self-care, or they endure all pain and call it discipline. Both groups suffer. Both groups fail. One group stays comfortable and regretful. The other group stays suffering and broken. Neither group transforms, because transformation requires embracing productive pain while eliminating destructive pain. And that requires discernment most people never develop. But you're not most people. You understand that pain is not the problem. Your relationship with pain is the problem. You understand that avoiding all pain keeps you weak. You understand that enduring all pain destroys you. You understand that strategic pain, the right pain, paid willingly for the right reasons, is the only path to transformation. You have a choice right now. Audit your current pain. Identify every area of discomfort in your life. Categorize it: productive or destructive, building or breaking, growth or damage. And tomorrow, lean into one productive pain you have been avoiding and eliminate one destructive pain you have been tolerating. That is not theory. That is how you stop suffering randomly and start suffering strategically. Pain is the price of admission. You cannot avoid paying it. You can only choose what you are paying it for. Pay it for growth and get transformation. Pay it for avoidance and get regret. Both cost pain. Only one creates power. You learn that pain is mandatory. Now let us talk about how to use it to clarify who you actually are. Chapter 4. Use rejection to refine your standards. You think rejection means you need to lower your standards. You think when someone says no, you need to become more accommodating, more flexible, more willing to accept less than what you want. You think rejection is feedback that you are asking for too much. But you are wrong. Rejection is not telling you to lower your standards. Rejection is telling you that your standards are working exactly as they should. They are filtering. They are sorting. They are eliminating what is not aligned. And that is not a problem. That is the point. Here is what you need to understand. Rejection reveals misalignment faster than acceptance. When someone accepts you, you might spend months or years discovering you are not actually compatible. When someone rejects you, they show you immediately that this connection, opportunity, or path is not calibrated to your actual value or direction. Rejection is the sorting mechanism working at maximum speed. Rejection is reality telling you with perfect clarity that this is not your fit. And that clarity is valuable. But only if you stop treating it as a wound and start treating it as information. That is the key. Rejection is not a verdict that you need to change. Rejection is confirmation that your standards are doing their job. Your standards are supposed to repel what is not right for you. Your standards are supposed to eliminate what is not aligned. Your standards are supposed to filter out the wrong people, wrong opportunities, wrong paths. And when they do that, when rejection happens, that is success, not failure. Your filter worked. Now stop being upset about it and start being grateful for it. You have a choice. You can continue treating rejection as evidence that you need to lower your standards and become more acceptable to more people. Or you can start treating rejection as evidence that your standards are protecting you from wasting time on wrong fits. But you cannot do both. And right now, your response to rejection is probably making you more accommodating when it should be making you more selective. Think about the last time you were rejected. What did you do? If you were like most people, you probably questioned yourself. You probably wondered if your standards were too high. You probably considered making yourself more palatable, more flexible, more willing to accept less. And that response is destroying your life. Because every time you lower your standards in response to rejection, you make yourself available to more wrong fits. You open yourself to more misalignment. You increase the chances of wasting your time on people and opportunities that were never right for you. That is the problem. You're using rejection as feedback to become more acceptable. But more acceptable means more acceptable to everyone, including people who are not right for you, including opportunities that will waste your potential, including paths that lead nowhere you want to go. And the more acceptable you become to everyone, the less aligned you become with anyone, including yourself. It is not about being difficult. It is not about being rigid. It is about understanding that rejection is not telling you to change your standards. Rejection is validating that your standards are working. And the correct response to rejection is not to lower your standards. The correct response is to maintain them or raise them. Here is the power of selective compatibility over universal acceptance. The strong do not want everyone's approval. They want the right people's recognition. They understand that being accepted by the wrong people is worse than being rejected by them. They understand that universal acceptance means you have no standards. You have no edge. You have no distinct identity. You're trying to be everything to everyone and ending up nothing to anyone. But selective compatibility is different. Selective compatibility means you are calibrated to specific people specific opportunities, specific paths. And everything else rejects you. And that is good. That is efficient. That is how you avoid wasting years on wrong fits. Every rejection from the wrong audience is progress toward finding the right one. Every no from someone incompatible is movement towards someone aligned. Every closed door that was not your door is redirection toward the door that is. That is the key. You do not need universal acceptance. You need selective compatibility. You need the right people to say yes. And the only way to find the right people is to have standards clear enough that the wrong people say no. Your standards should repel before they attract. They should eliminate before they connect. They should filter constantly so that what remains is actually aligned. You have a choice. Continue trying to be acceptable to everyone and remain incompatible with everyone, including yourself. Or become aggressively selective and build a life calibrated to who you actually are and what you actually want. One approach makes you popular with people who do not matter. The other approach makes you powerful with people who do. Here is what most people do not understand. Every rejection is telling you that your standards are too effective for that person or opportunity. Not too high, too effective. They're working. They are eliminating what should be eliminated. And the correct response is not to dilute your standards so more people can pass your filter. The correct response is to trust your filter and be grateful it is protecting you from wasting time. Think about it this way. If everyone accepted you, that would mean your standards are so low that anyone can meet them. That would mean you have no filter, no discernment, no requirements. And that is not attractive. That is desperate. The person who is rejected frequently is not the person with standards too high. That is the person with standards at all. And standards always create rejection. Always. Because standards eliminate. That is their function. So here is the protocol. Raise your standards every time you are rejected. Not lower them. Raise them. Use rejection as confirmation that you are filtering correctly and proof that you should filter even more. Make yourself more selective, not less. Make your requirements more specific, not more flexible. Make your standards more demanding, not more accommodating. Most people will think this is insane. Most people will tell you that if you keep getting rejected, you need to lower your standards. But most people are trying to be acceptable to everyone and ending up aligned with no one. You are not most people. You understand that rejection is not evidence of standards that are too high. Rejection is evidence of standards that are working. You have a choice right now. There is rejection you experienced that made you question your standards. Rejection that made you wonder if you were asking for too much. And you have a choice. Use that rejection as feedback to lower your standards and become more acceptable to wrong fits. Or use that rejection as validation to maintain or raise your standards and become more aligned with right fits. Here is what happens when you raise your standards after rejection. You get rejected more. At first, because you just became even more selective. You just narrowed your filter even further. You just made it even harder for people to meet your requirements. And that creates more rejection in the short term. But here's what else happens. The people who do meet your standards are far more aligned. The opportunities that do pass your filter are far more valuable. The paths that do remain available are far more correct. That is the trade-off. More rejection from wrong fits in exchange for better alignment with right fits. More no's from people who would waste your time in exchange for more yes from people who are actually compatible. More closed doors that were never your doors in exchange for open doors that are exactly your doors. And that trade-off is worth it. Every single time. But you have to be willing to endure the rejection. You have to be willing to be told no repeatedly. You have to be willing to be eliminated by people and opportunities that are not aligned. And most people are not willing. Most people experience a few rejections and immediately start lowering their standards to increase acceptance. And that is why most people end up in relationships jobs, and lives that are misaligned, because they optimize for acceptance instead of alignment. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are be acceptable to as many people as possible, your life becomes a performance for an audience that does not matter. If your commands are maintain standards so high that only the right people and opportunities can meet them, your life becomes calibrated to what actually aligns with who you are. You have commanded yourself to understand that rejection refines your standards. Now command yourself to use it that way. Tomorrow, identify one area where you have been lowering your standards to avoid rejection, and deliberately raise those standards. Make them more specific. Make them more demanding. Make them more selective. And accept that this will create more rejection. That is the point. You are filtering more effectively. That is not failure. That is function. Use rejection to refine your standards, not by lowering them, by raising them. You learn that rejection is your filter working. Now, let us talk about what failure reveals that success never could. Chapter 5. Failure shows you what success actually requires. You think you understand what success requires. You have read about it. You have studied it. You have analyzed other people's success stories. And based on that analysis, you have created a plan, a timeline, an expectation of what it will take to get what you want. But you are wrong. Not because your research was bad, because success stories are useless without failure context. And failure context is the one thing nobody shares honestly. Here is what you need to understand. You learn nothing from someone telling you what worked. You learn everything from understanding the 50 things they tried that failed first, the attempts that crashed, the approaches that backfired, the assumptions that were wrong, the timeline that was unrealistic, the resources that were insufficient, the skills that were missing. That is the information that shows you what success actually requires. But that information only comes from failure, never from success. That is the key. Success stories are polished. They are edited. They are presented as if the path from start to finish was clear, direct, and logical. As if the person knew what they were doing the entire time. As if they just followed the steps and arrived at the destination. But that is not what happened. What happened is they failed repeatedly, adjusted constantly, and eventually stumbled onto something that worked. But when they tell the story, all the failure disappears. All that remains is the success. And that edited version teaches you nothing about what success actually costs. You have a choice. You can continue learning from success stories that hide the failure and stay naive about what is actually required. Or you can start learning from your own failures that reveal the true requirements. But you cannot do both. And right now, your reliance on success stories is probably why you keep underestimating what your goals require. Think about your current goal, whatever you are working toward. What did you think it would take when you started? How long did you think it would require? How much effort did you estimate? How much pain did you expect? If you're honest, you probably underestimated all of it. You probably thought it would take half the time, require half the effort, cost half the pain. And now you know better. Not because someone told you, because you failed, because you attempted and crashed and discovered that your initial estimate was wildly inaccurate. That is failure teaching you. That is failure showing you the gap between what you think success requires and what it actually demands. And that gap is the most valuable information you can get. Because once you see the gap clearly, you can close it. You can develop the additional capability. You can extend the timeline. You can increase the effort. You can build the tolerance. But you can only close the gap if you know the gap exists. And you only know the gap exists because you failed. It is not about feeling good about failure. It is not about celebrating crashes. It is about recognizing that failure is the only teacher that shows you the real requirements, the actual timeline, and the true cost of what you are attempting. Success cannot teach you that. Success only teaches you that you met the requirements. It does not teach you what the requirements are. Failure teaches you the requirements by showing you where you fell short. Here's why most people fail. Not because they lack capability, not because they lack work ethic, not because they lack desire. They fail because they underestimate the difficulty, the duration, and the discomfort required. They think 6 months when it takes 6 years. They think moderate effort when it takes obsessive effort. They think occasional discomfort when it requires sustained pain. And when reality reveals the actual requirements, they quit because they were not prepared for what success actually costs. But here is what happens when you treat failure as requirement revelation instead of as defeat. You stop quitting. You stop being surprised by how hard it is. You stop expecting it to be easier than it is. Because every failure updates your understanding of what is required. Every crash shows you what you were missing. Every breakdown reveals what needs to be built. And instead of quitting when you discover the real cost, you just adjust your timeline, increase your effort, and continue. That is the key. Failure closes the gap between what you think success requires and what it actually demands. And closing that gap is not defeat. Closing that gap is progress. Because every failure that shows you a requirement you are missing is a failure that makes you more capable of eventually succeeding. As long as you extract the lesson, you have a choice. Continue treating failure as evidence that you cannot succeed, or start treating failure as education about what succeeding actually requires. One interpretation makes you quit. The other interpretation makes you adjust. Same failures, different responses, different outcomes. Here is the protocol. Every time you fail, you ask one question. What does this failure reveal about what success actually requires that I did not know before? Not what does this failure say about me? Not why did I fail? What requirement did this failure expose that I was not meeting? Be specific. Did it reveal that you need more skill, more time, more resources, more tolerance for discomfort, more persistence, more knowledge? Whatever it revealed, that is the requirement. And now you know. And once you know, you have a decision. Do I want this goal enough to meet the actual requirements? Not the requirements I wished it had. The requirements it actually has. Because this is where most people quit. This is where most people discover that what they thought would take 6 months will take 6 years. And they decide it is not worth it. And that is fine. That is honest. That is better than continuing while resenting the actual cost. But if you decide the goal is worth the actual requirements, then you adjust. You extend your timeline. You increase your capability. You build more tolerance. You gather more resources. You develop more skill. You close the gap that failure revealed. And then you attempt again. And you probably fail again. And that failure reveals another requirement. And you close that gap. And you attempt again. And you repeat this process until you have closed enough gaps that you succeed. That is how success actually happens. Not through following a plan that works the first time. Through failing repeatedly, extracting requirements, closing gaps, and attempting again until you have built enough capability to meet the actual demands of what you are pursuing. And the people who succeed are not people who fail less. There are people who use failure to close gaps instead of using failure to quit. You have a choice. You can continue being surprised by how hard things are and quitting when they are harder than you expected. Or you can start treating every failure as requirement revelation that shows you exactly what capability you need to build next. One approach makes you someone who quits when reality does not match expectation. The other approach makes you someone who adjusts when reality reveals truth. Here is what happens when you build failure fluency. Failure fluency means the ability to fail, extract the lesson, adjust, and attempt again without emotional delay or identity damage. Most people fail and then spend weeks or months recovering emotionally before they can attempt again. They take the failure personally. They question themselves. They doubt whether they should continue. And all of that delay prevents them from attempting again quickly enough to benefit from the lesson the failure taught. But failure fluency means you fail, extract the requirement immediately, adjust immediately, and attempt again immediately. No emotional processing, no identity questioning, no delay, just clinical analysis, strategic adjustment, and rapid reattempt. And that speed creates a massive advantage because the person who can fail, learn, and reattempt 10 times while you are still emotionally recovering from failure 1 will reach success 10 times faster than you. That is the key. Speed of iteration matters more than perfection of execution. The person who fails fast, learns fast, and attempts fast will always outperform the person who attempts once, fails once, and spends months recovering before attempting again. Because success is not found through perfect execution. Success is found through rapid iteration that closes gaps faster than competitors can attempt once. You have a choice right now. Continue treating failure as something you need to emotionally recover from before attempting again. Or start treating failure as data you extract immediately and implement immediately. One approach makes you slow. The other approach makes you fast. And in competitive environments, fast always beats slow. Even if fast is messy and slow is perfect. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are treat failure as defeat that requires emotional recovery, your life progresses slowly with long gaps between attempts. If your commands are treat failure as requirement revelation that demands immediate adjustment and reattempt, your life progresses rapidly through iteration that closes gaps faster than emotional delay can slow you. You have commanded yourself to understand that failure shows you requirements. Now command yourself to extract those requirements faster. Tomorrow, identify one failure you experienced recently. Apply the requirement question. What did this failure reveal about what success actually requires that you did not know before? Extract one specific requirement, and then immediately take one action to close that gap. Not next week, tomorrow. That is not theory. That is failure fluency in practice. Failure shows you what success actually requires. You learn to extract requirements. Now let's talk about what pain creates that comfort never could. Chapter 6. Pain creates depth that comfort cannot. You think comfort is the goal. You think once you have eliminated all pain, once you have created a life that is easy and smooth and free from struggle, you will have succeeded. But you are wrong, because the life you're building toward, the comfortable life, the pain-free life, produces people who are shallow, fragile, and incapable of understanding anything that matters. Comfort does not create depth. Pain creates depth. And without depth, you are not fully human. You're just surviving without substance. Here is what you need to understand. Your greatest power comes from your deepest pain. The experiences that nearly broke you are the same experiences that created your capacity for empathy, resilience, and understanding that people who have lived comfortable lives will never possess. The struggle you survived gave you depth. The pain you endured gave you wisdom. The suffering you processed gave you the ability to connect with others who are suffering in ways that comfortable people cannot even comprehend. That is the key. Pain is not just destructive. Pain is constructive of qualities that cannot be developed any other way. You cannot learn real empathy from a book. You learn it by suffering and then recognizing that same suffering in others. You cannot develop real resilience from avoiding difficulty. You develop it by being broken and having to rebuild yourself. You cannot gain real wisdom from comfort. You gain it by making mistakes, experiencing consequences, and extracting lessons that can only be learned through pain. You have a choice. You can continue trying to eliminate all pain from your life and remain shallow, or you can recognize that the pain you have experienced and the pain you will experience is creating depth that comfort never could. But you cannot do both. And right now, your avoidance of pain is preventing you from developing the depth that makes you powerful, connected, and substantive. Think about the people you respect most. The people who have real depth. The people who understand pain, loss, struggle, failure. The people whose presence feels substantial. The people whose wisdom feels earned. What do they have in common? They suffered. They struggled. They were broken and rebuilt. They paid prices that comfortable people will never pay. And that payment created something in them that comfort cannot create. Depth. Now think about people who have lived comfortable lives. People who have avoided all struggle. People who have been protected from pain. People who have never experienced real loss or real failure. What are they like? If you are honest, they are shallow. They lack substance. They lack the ability to understand suffering. They lack empathy for people in pain. They lack wisdom about how life actually works. Not because they are bad people, because they have never been forged in the fire that creates those qualities. That is the bankruptcy of a life without struggle. People who avoid all pain remain shallow, fragile, and incapable of understanding or handling real difficulty. They have no reference point for suffering. They have no capacity for empathy with people who struggle. They have no wisdom about resilience because they have never needed to be resilient. They are emotionally and psychologically underdeveloped, not by choice, by protection, by avoidance, by organizing their entire life around comfort. It is not about seeking suffering. It is not about pain for pain's sake. It is about understanding that the pain you have experienced is not wasted. The pain you have survived is not just damage. The pain you have endured has created qualities in you that comfortable people will never have. And those qualities are your power, your depth, your substance, your ability to connect with others who suffer, your wisdom about what matters, your resilience in the face of difficulty. You have a choice. Continue viewing your pain as damage that diminished you, or start viewing your pain as construction that created depth you would not have without it. One perspective makes you a victim. The other perspective makes you powerful. Here is what most people do not understand. The same experience that makes one person bitter makes another person powerful. Same pain, same struggle, same loss. But one person allows the pain to close them. The pain makes them hard, resentful, and isolated. The other person uses the pain to expand them. The pain makes them compassionate, wise, and connected. The difference is not the pain. The difference is whether you allow pain to destroy you or whether you transmute pain into wisdom. That is the key. Transmuting pain into wisdom instead of bitterness. And transmutation requires a decision, a conscious choice about what you will do with the pain you experience. Will you let it make you bitter? Will you let it make you resentful? Will you let it make you closed and hard and angry at the world? Or will you process it, extract the lessons, and allow it to make you compassionate, understanding, and wise? Most people never make that choice consciously. Most people just react to pain, and their reaction determines what the pain creates in them. If they react with bitterness, pain creates bitterness. If they react with blame, pain creates resentment. If they react with victimhood, pain creates helplessness. But if they react with processing, pain creates wisdom. If they react with extraction, pain creates strength. If they react with integration, pain creates depth. You have a choice. React to pain unconsciously and let it create whatever it creates. Or respond to pain consciously and direct what it creates in you. One approach makes you a product of your pain. The other approach makes you the architect of what your pain produces. Here is the protocol for transmuting pain into wisdom instead of bitterness. When you experience pain, you do not suppress it. You do not avoid it. You do not numb it. You process it. You sit with it. You feel it completely. And while you're feeling it, you ask questions. What is this pain teaching me? What does this pain reveal about what matters? What does this pain show me about myself, about others, about life? What wisdom is available in this pain if I am willing to extract it? Those questions change everything, because those questions shift you from passive victim of pain to active extractor of wisdom. Those questions turn pain from something that happens to you into something you use. Those questions transform suffering from damage into education. And that transformation is what creates depth instead of bitterness. Most people never ask those questions. Most people just feel the pain and then try to make it stop as quickly as possible. They numb it. They distract from it. They medicate it. They avoid processing it. And because they never process it, they never extract the wisdom. The pain just sits inside them, unprocessed, creating bitterness, resentment, and fragility. And years later, they are still carrying pain that could have been transformed into wisdom if they had been willing to process it. But you're not most people. You understand that pain is not just something to survive. Pain is something to extract wisdom from. Pain is something to process completely so that it transforms you instead of damages you. Pain is the raw material that creates depth if you are willing to do the work of transmutation. You have a choice right now. There is pain you are carrying that you have not processed. Pain you have been avoiding, numbing, or try to make disappear. And you have a choice. Continue carrying that pain as unprocessed damage that creates bitterness. Or process that pain by asking the extraction questions and converting it into wisdom that creates depth. Here is what happens when you transmute pain into wisdom. You become someone who can sit with others in their pain without trying to fix it. You become someone who understands suffering without being destroyed by it. You become someone whose presence feels substantial because you have been through things that created substance. You become someone who has earned the right to speak about difficulty because you have lived through difficulty and extracted wisdom from it. And that depth is power. Not power over others. Power with others. The power to connect deeply. The power to understand completely. The power to help meaningfully. The power that comes from having survived what you survived and become wiser instead of bitter. That is what pain creates when you process it correctly. That is the depth that comfort cannot create. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are avoid all pain and stay comfortable, your life becomes shallow, fragile, and lacking in the substance that depth creates. If your commands are process pain completely and extract wisdom, your life becomes deep, resilient, and full of substance that comfortable people will never possess. You have commanded yourself to understand that pain creates depth. Now command yourself to process the pain you have been avoiding. Tonight, identify one painful experience you have been carrying without processing. Apply the extraction questions. What did this teach you? What did this reveal? What wisdom is available if you process this completely? Extract one piece of wisdom. And tomorrow, apply that wisdom to how you live. That is not theory. That is how you transmute pain into power. Pain creates depth that comfort cannot. You learn to extract wisdom from suffering. Now let's talk about what rejection reveals that acceptance never could. Chapter 7. Rejection teaches you who you are not. You think rejection is telling you something is wrong with you. You think when someone says no, they are identifying a flaw, a deficiency, a problem that needs to be fixed. But you are wrong. Rejection is not revealing what is wrong with you. Rejection is revealing who you are not. And that information is more valuable than anything acceptance could teach you. Because knowing who you are not is how you discover who you actually are. Here is what you need to understand. Every rejection is information about a path, person, or place that would have wasted your time, energy, or potential. The job that rejected you would have kept you in the wrong industry. The person who rejected you would have been incompatible. The opportunity that rejected you would have distracted you from the better one. Rejection is not punishment. Rejection is protection. Protection from wrong fits disguised as opportunities. That is the key. The gift of discovering incompatibility early. Every rejection accelerates your discovery process. Every no eliminates a path you do not need to explore. Every closed door redirects you before you waste years walking through the wrong one. And that acceleration is valuable. That elimination is efficient. That redirection is protection. But only if you stop taking it personally and start using it strategically. You have a choice. You can continue treating rejection as evidence that something is wrong with you. Or you can start treating rejection as information that something was not aligned with you. But you cannot do both. And right now, your personal interpretation is preventing you from receiving the strategic gift rejection is offering. Think about the rejections you have experienced. The job you did not get. The relationship that ended. The opportunity that disappeared. What if those rejections were not saying you are inadequate? What if they were saying you're not a fit for this specific thing? What if they were protecting you from wasting time on paths that were never going to lead where you actually want to go? You cannot know for certain. But what you can know is that rejection sorted you away from that option. And that sorting either protected you from a wrong fit or exposed a gap you need to close. Either way, the information is useful. Either way, rejection is serving you. But only if you extract the information instead of internalizing the wound. It is not about pretending rejection does not matter. It is not about being emotionless. It is about separating the information from the interpretation. About recognizing that rejection is revealing misalignment, not inadequacy. About understanding that being rejected from the wrong path is progress toward finding the right one. Here is how rejection eliminates false identities. When you are rejected while pretending to be someone you are not, that rejection is a gift. It is reality telling you that the performance is not sustainable, that the version of yourself you are presenting is not authentic, that the identity you are trying to maintain is not actually you, and that information forces you back toward your actual self. Forces you to stop performing and start being real. Most people respond to this type of rejection by improving the performance. They get better at pretending. They become more convincing at being someone they are not. They double down on the false identity because they think the rejection means they were not performing well enough. But that is the opposite of what rejection is teaching. Rejection is teaching that the performance itself is the problem. That who you are pretending to be is not who you should be. That authenticity is required. You have a choice. Use rejection as feedback to improve your performance of a false identity. Or use rejection as information that you need to stop performing and start being authentic. One approach makes you better at being fake. The other approach makes you real. Here is what the strong do that you need to learn. They track patterns in their rejections to discover their authentic edge. They notice what consistently gets rejected, what qualities, perspectives, or approaches repeatedly repel certain people while attracting others. And instead of trying to eliminate those qualities to be more universally accepted, they lean into those qualities to be more authentically themselves. That is the key. Your rejections reveal your edge. The thing about you that is polarizing. The quality that some people love and others hate. The perspective that attracts the right people and repels the wrong people. And that edge is your authenticity. That edge is who you actually are when you stop trying to be acceptable to everyone. Most people try to sand down their edges. They try to eliminate the qualities that get rejected. They try to become more neutral, more palatable, more universally acceptable. And in doing so, they become less authentic. They become a diluted version of themselves that offends no one and excites no one. They become forgettable in their attempt to be acceptable. But rejection is telling you the opposite. Rejection is telling you where your edge is. And your edge is your power. Your edge is what makes you distinctive. Your edge is what attracts the right people, even though it repels the wrong people. And trying to eliminate your edge to avoid rejection is trying to eliminate what makes you authentic to gain acceptance from people who will never truly connect with you anyway. You have a choice. Continue trying to eliminate your edge to avoid rejection, or lean into your edge and use rejection as confirmation that your authentic self is working exactly as it should. One approach makes you acceptable and forgettable. The other approach makes you polarizing and powerful. Here is the protocol. Track your rejection patterns for 30 days. Every time you were rejected, write down what you were doing, who you were being, what you were expressing. And at the end of 30 days, look for patterns. What consistently gets rejected? What qualities, perspectives, or approaches repeatedly trigger no? That pattern is your edge. That pattern is your authentic self trying to emerge. And instead of eliminating that pattern, you amplify it. Most people will not do this. Most people will notice the pattern and immediately try to eliminate it. They will view consistent rejection in one area as evidence that they need to change that area. But consistent rejection in one area is evidence that you have an authentic edge there, that you're being distinctively yourself, that you're repelling wrong fits while creating the possibility of attracting right fits. You have a choice right now. There is a quality about you that consistently gets rejected. Something you say, something you do, something you are that certain people do not like. And you have been trying to eliminate that quality to avoid rejection. Stop. That quality is your edge. That quality is your authenticity. That quality is what will attract the right people, even though it repels the wrong people. Here is what happens when you lean into your edge instead of sanding it down. You get rejected more by wrong fits. That is guaranteed. But you also get accepted more deeply by right fits. Because the people who are attracted to your authentic edge are attracted to the real you, not the performed you, not the acceptable you, the actual you. And those connections are deeper, stronger, and more valuable than any connection built on performance. That is the trade-off. More rejection from people who are never going to be right for you anyway in exchange for deeper connection with people who are actually compatible. More no's from wrong fits in exchange for more meaningful yes from right fits. And that trade wide is always worth it. Because one deep connection with someone who accepts your authentic self is worth more than 1,000 surface connections with people who only accept your performance. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are eliminate everything about you that gets rejected, your life becomes a performance that attracts no one authentically. If your commands are lean into what makes you distinctively you, even though it creates rejection, your life becomes authentic and attracts people who are actually compatible. You have commanded yourself to understand that rejection teaches you who you are not. Now command yourself to use that information to discover who you are. Tomorrow, identify one quality about you that consistently gets rejected, and instead of trying to eliminate it, express it more fully. Let it repel who it repels. Let it attract who it attracts. That is not theory. That is how you use rejection to discover and express your authentic self. Rejection teaches you who you are not. You learn to use that to discover who you are. Now, let us talk about the loudest feedback you will ever receive. Chapter 8. Failure is feedback at maximum volume. You have been getting feedback your entire life. Gentle feedback, polite feedback, subtle feedback that you can ignore if you want to. And you have been ignoring it. You have been dismissing it. You have been continuing to do things that do not work because the feedback was quiet enough to pretend you did not hear it. But failure is different. Failure is feedback at maximum volume. Failure is feedback you cannot ignore. And that is exactly why failure is more valuable than any other form of feedback you will ever receive. Here is what you need to understand. Success can happen despite doing things wrong. You can succeed with a flawed strategy if the market is good. You can succeed with mediocre execution if the timing is perfect. You can succeed while making mistakes if you have enough resources to absorb them. Success is forgiving. Success hides problems. Success allows you to continue doing things incorrectly because you're still getting results. And that forgiveness is dangerous because it prevents you from learning what actually needs to be fixed. But failure is not forgiving. Failure forces you to confront exactly what is not working. Failure exposes every flaw in your strategy. Failure reveals every gap in your execution. Failure shows you precisely where your assumptions were wrong. Failure is the only feedback mechanism that tells you the complete truth without any cushioning. And that brutal honesty is what makes failure more valuable than success. That is the key. Success teaches you that you met the requirements. But success does not teach you what the requirements actually are. Success does not show you what you did wrong that you got away with. Success does not reveal the problems that will eventually destroy you. Failure teaches you all of that. Failure shows you exactly what is not working. And that clarity is worth more than the temporary satisfaction of succeeding while making mistakes. You have a choice. You can continue avoiding failure and never get the clearest feedback available. Or you can start treating failure as the loudest, most honest teacher you have access to. But you cannot do both. And right now, your avoidance of failure is preventing you from learning what only failure can teach. Think about the times you succeeded despite doing things wrong. The project that worked even though your process was chaotic. The relationship that lasted even though your communication was poor. The business that grew even though your strategy was flawed. In those moments, success let you continue with the problems. Success did not force you to fix anything. And eventually, those unfixed problems came due. Eventually, what success forgave, failure exposed. And by then, the cost was much higher. That is what happens when you rely on success for feedback. Success is a delayed teacher. Success lets problems compound while you think everything is fine. Success allows you to build on faulty foundations because the structure has not collapsed yet. But failure is an immediate teacher. Failure shows you the problems now. Failure forces correction before the cost multiplies. Failure is harsh, but failure is honest. And honest feedback now is always better than deferred catastrophe later. It is not about seeking failure. It is not about wanting to crash. It is about understanding that when you do fail, you are receiving feedback that success would never give you. Feedback you need. Feedback that shows you exactly what to fix. And the only question is whether you will listen to that feedback or whether you will take it personally and ignore the lesson. Here is the difference between failing and being a failure. Failing is an event. Something happened. An attempt did not work. A strategy collapsed. An execution missed the mark. That is failing. That is an outcome. That is feedback about what did not work. Being a failure is an identity. A belief that the event defines who you are. A decision to internalize the outcome as a statement about your worth. That is being a failure. And that is a choice you make by refusing to separate the event from your identity. Most people do not make that separation. Most people fail and immediately make it mean something about them. They failed, therefore they are a failure. They crashed, therefore they are incapable. They did not succeed, therefore they are not worthy of success. And that internalization destroys them. Because once you identify as a failure, you cannot use failure as feedback. You can only survive failure as an attack on who you are. That is the key. You have to separate the event from your identity. You have to recognize that failing is something that happened, not something you are. You have to treat failure as data about what did not work, not as evidence about who you are. And that separation is what allows you to fail repeatedly without identity damage. That separation is what creates failure fluency. You have a choice. Continue internalizing failure as identity and make every failure a threat to who you are. Or start separating failure from identity and make every failure just feedback about what needs adjustment. One approach makes failure catastrophic. The other approach makes failure useful. Here is the protocol for separation. When you fail, you state the facts without interpretation. I attempted this. It did not work. That is failing. That is the event. Then you block the interpretation. I'm not a failure. I am someone who failed at this specific thing. And then you extract the feedback. What did not work? What needs adjustment? What does this failure teach me about what to do differently next attempt? Facts. Separation. Extraction. No identity damage. Just clinical analysis that produces strategic adjustment. Most people skip the separation step. They go straight from the event to the identity. They fail and immediately conclude something about themselves. And that conclusion prevents them from extracting the feedback. Because when failure becomes identity, feedback becomes attack. And you cannot learn from feedback that feels like an attack on who you are. But when you separate the event from identity, feedback is just information. Failure is just data. Crashing is just a result that teaches you what not to do next time. And that data is valuable. That information is what allows you to iterate, adjust, and improve. That feedback is what creates progress, but only if you can receive it without making it mean something about your worth. You have a choice right now. There's failure you internalized as identity. Failure you made mean something about who you are instead of something about what did not work. And that internalization is preventing you from extracting the feedback that failure was trying to give you. Separate the event from identity. Restate the facts, extract the feedback, and use that feedback to adjust your next attempt. Here is what the strong do that you need to learn. They create feedback loops that accelerate through failure. They build systems that allow them to fail fast, fail cheap, and fail forward. They test assumptions rapidly. They gather data constantly. They iterate based on what breaks. And they do all of this without emotional delay or identity damage. Because they treat failure as rapid prototyping instead of permanent verdict. That is the key. Failure is not a verdict. Failure is a prototype, a test, an experiment that produced data. And the faster you can run experiments, gather data, and iterate based on what you learn, the faster you progress. But you can only move at that speed if failure does not require emotional recovery time. If failure does not threaten your identity. If failure is just feedback you extract and implement immediately. Most people cannot move at that speed. Most people fail and then need weeks or months to recover emotionally before they can attempt again. And that delay kills momentum. That delay allows competitors who fail faster to iterate past you. That delay prevents you from using failure as the accelerant it actually is. You have a choice. Continue treating failure as something you need to emotionally recover from before attempting again. Or start treating failure as data you extract immediately and implement immediately. One approach makes you slow. The other approach makes you dangerous. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are treat failure as identity threat that requires recovery, your life progresses slowly with massive gaps between attempts. If your commands are treat failure as maximum volume feedback that demands immediate extraction and implementation, your life progresses rapidly through iteration that accelerates with every failure. You have commanded yourself to understand that failure is feedback at maximum volume. Now command yourself to listen to it without making it personal. Tomorrow, identify one recent failure. Apply the separation protocol. State the facts without interpretation. Block the identity conclusion. Extract the feedback and immediately implement one adjustment based on that feedback. That is not theory. That is how you turn failure from verdict into velocity. Failure is feedback at maximum volume. You learn to listen without internalizing. Now, let us talk about what pain reveals about where you need to grow next. Chapter 9. Pain reveals your actual limits. You think you know your limits. You think you have a clear understanding of what you can handle and what you cannot. You think the boundaries you have set for yourself are accurate reflections of your actual capacity. But you are wrong. You do not know your limits. You know your comfort preferences. You know where you usually stop. You know the point at which you typically quit. But that is not your limit. That is just where you have been choosing to stop. And pain is the only thing that shows you the difference. Here is what you need to understand. Pain does not lie about what you can currently handle. Pain shows you exactly where your capacity ends and your next growth opportunity begins. When you experience pain, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, that pain is a GPS signal. It is telling you with perfect precision where you are operating at or beyond your current capability. And that information is more valuable than any comfortable experience could ever teach you. That is the key. Pain is not punishment for doing something wrong. Pain is information about where your edge is, where your current capacity meets the demands you are placing on it, where growth is available if you are willing to build there. And that information only comes through pain. Comfort never tells you where your limits are. Comfort only tells you that you're operating well within your capacity. But pain tells you exactly where capacity ends. And that is where you need to focus if you want to grow. You have a choice. You can continue avoiding pain and never discover where your actual limits are. Or you can start using pain as a mapping system that shows you precisely where to build next. But you cannot do both. And right now, your avoidance of pain is preventing you from discovering the boundaries you need to push. Think about the last time you experienced significant pain. Maybe physical pain during training. Maybe emotional pain during a difficult situation. Maybe psychological pain when you attempted something at the edge of your capability. What was that pain telling you? If you stopped to listen, that pain was showing you exactly where your current capacity is insufficient for what you are attempting. And that gap between capacity and demand is your growth opportunity. But most people do not listen. Most people experience pain and immediately interpret it as a signal to stop. They think pain means they're doing damage. They think pain means they have reached a boundary they should not cross. They think pain is their body or mind telling them to quit. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes pain is warning you about damage. But most of the time, pain is just showing you where growth is available. It is not about ignoring pain. It is not about pushing through everything. It is about learning to distinguish between the pain that signals growth opportunity and the pain that signals actual damage. And that distinction is critical, because if you treat all pain the same, you will either avoid everything uncomfortable and never grow, or you will push through everything painful and destroy yourself. Here is the distinction. Pain that signals growth is productive pain. It is uncomfortable. It creates resistance. It makes you want to stop, but is not causing damage. It is showing you where your current capacity is being challenged, where adaptation is available, where you can build if you stay with the discomfort long enough for the adaptation to occur. This pain should be explored, understood, and used strategically. Pain that signals damage is destructive pain. It is sharp. It is specific. It worsens with continuation. It indicates that something is breaking rather than building. This pain is your body or mind telling you that continuing will cause harm rather than growth. This pain should be respected immediately, and the activity causing it should be stopped or modified. That is the key, knowing when to push through pain and when to stop because of pain. And that knowledge only comes from paying attention to what pain is actually telling you. Most people never develop this discernment. They either avoid all pain or push through all pain. And both approaches fail. One keeps you weak. The other destroys you. You have a choice. Continue treating all pain the same and either avoid growth or create damage. Or learn to distinguish between productive pain and destructive pain and use that distinction to grow strategically without destroying yourself. One approach is simple but ineffective. The other approach requires discernment but creates sustainable growth. Here is what happens when you use pain as a limitation detector. You stop being afraid of pain. You start being curious about it. When pain arrives, instead of immediately trying to make it stop, you interrogate it. You ask, what is this pain telling me? Is this showing me a growth edge or warning me about damage? Is this resistance to adaptation or indication of harm? And based on that answer, you either push deeper or back off strategically. That interrogation changes everything because it transforms pain from enemy into ally. Pain becomes information you use rather than experience you avoid. Pain becomes the signal that directs your training, your focus, your development efforts. Pain shows you exactly where to build next. And building where pain indicates creates targeted growth that expands your capacity precisely where you need it. You have a choice right now. There's pain you have been avoiding. Pain that shows up when you push yourself. And you have been interpreting that pain as a signal to stop. But what if that pain is actually showing you where your next growth opportunity is? What if that pain is revealing the exact boundary you need to push to expand your capacity? Here is the protocol. When you experience pain, you pause. You do not immediately stop. You do not immediately push through. You pause and assess. Is this pain sharp and specific or dull and general? Is this pain worsening or stable? Is this pain in a vulnerable area or a strong area? These questions help you distinguish between damage signals and growth signals. And once you know which type of pain you are experiencing, you act accordingly. If it is damage pain, you stop immediately. You modify the activity. You remove the load. You protect yourself from harm. No negotiation. No pushing through. Damage pain is respected. If it is growth pain, you stay with it. You explore it. You understand where it is coming from and what it is revealing about your current limits. And then you make a strategic decision about whether to push slightly beyond that limit to create adaptation or to work at that limit until it becomes comfortable before pushing further. That is the distinction in practice. Damage pain stops you immediately. Growth pain guides you strategically. Both types of pain are respected, but they are respected differently. And knowing the difference is what allows you to grow without destroying yourself. Most people never develop this skill. Most people just react to pain. They either stop every time they feel discomfort or they push through everything until they break. Neither approach works long-term. Stopping at all discomfort prevents growth. Pushing through all pain creates injury. The strong do neither. The strong use pain as information that guides strategic decision-making. You have a choice. Continue reacting to pain unconsciously, or start responding to pain strategically. One approach makes you controlled by pain. The other approach makes you informed by pain. Here is what happens when you use pain to map your expansion path. Every area where you experience productive pain is an area where you can expand capacity. That pain is showing you where to focus your training, where to direct your effort, where to build next. And that map is more accurate than any program or plan someone else could give you, because that map is based on your actual limits, not theoretical limits. Your pain map is personal. It shows you specifically where you need to grow, not where someone else needed to grow, not where average people need to grow, where you specifically have capacity that can be expanded. And following that map creates targeted growth that builds you where you actually need building. Your life obeys what you command. But if your commands are avoid all pain, your life stays within limits that never expand. If your commands are use pain as GPS that shows me where to grow next, your life expands systematically in the exact areas where expansion is possible. You have commanded yourself to understand that pain reveals limits. Now command yourself to use that information to expand those limits strategically. Tomorrow, when you experience pain, apply the assessment protocol. Distinguish between damage and growth. And if it is growth pain, stay with it long enough to understand what limit it is revealing. That is not theory. That is how you use pain as a mapping system that directs your expansion. Pain reveals your actual limits. You learn to read what pain is telling you. Now let us bring everything together and reveal the complete transformation process. Chapter 10. Alchemy, Turning Lead into Gold. You have learned that rejection is data. That failure is tuition. That pain is the price of admission. You have learned that rejection refines your standards. That failure reveals requirements. That pain creates depth. You have learned all of this intellectually. But intellectual understanding is not transformation. Transformation happens when you have a systematic process for converting every negative experience into fuel, clarity, or capability. That process is alchemy. And this chapter gives you the complete framework. Here is what you need to understand. Rejection, failure, and pain are raw materials. They are not good or bad. They are not helpful or harmful. They are neutral inputs waiting to be processed. And the strong have a systematic process for extracting value, discarding emotion, and converting every negative experience into something useful. That process is not automatic. That process is not natural. That process is trained. And that training is what separates people who are broken by difficulty from people who are built by it. That is the key. The transformation protocol that the strong use automatically. When something negative happens, they do not react emotionally. They do not take it personally. They do not spiral into shame or doubt. They run a protocol, a systematic process that extracts value from every experience regardless of how it felt. And that protocol is what makes them unbreakable. Because nothing breaks them. Everything builds them. You have a choice. You can continue reacting emotionally to negative experiences and letting them damage you. Or you can start running a protocol that transforms those experiences into power. But you cannot do both. And right now, your lack of systematic processing is why negative experiences still have power over you. Here is the complete alchemy framework. 5 steps: separation, extraction, integration, application, iteration. Every negative experience goes through this 5-step process. And at the end of the process, the experience no longer controls you. You control what the experience produces in you. That is alchemy. That is how you turn lead into gold. Step 1. Separation. When something negative happens, you immediately separate the event from your identity. You state the facts without interpretation. This happened. This person said no. This attempt failed. This situation caused pain. Facts only. No meaning. No identity implications. No emotional narrative, just what actually occurred. This step prevents internalization. This step stops you from making the event mean something about who you are. Most people skip this step. Most people go straight from the event to the meaning. Something negative happens, and they immediately conclude something about themselves. And that conclusion is what damages them, not the event, the meaning they assign to the event. Separation blocks that damage by refusing to assign meaning until after you have extracted value. Step 2. Extraction. Once you have separated the event from identity, you extract the value. You ask what is useful here. What information does this contain? What lesson is available? If it is rejection, what misalignment does this reveal? If it is failure, what requirement does this expose? If it is pain, what limit does this show me? You mine the experience for every piece of value it contains. And you do this clinically, without emotion, without judgment, just extraction. This is where most people fail, even if they manage separation. They separate the event from identity, but then they just try to move on without extracting anything. They waste the experience. They paid the price of rejection, failure, or pain, but they did not take the education. And that waste is what makes negative experiences purely damaging instead of transformative. Step 3. Integration. Once you have extracted the value, you integrate it into your understanding. You take the lesson and make it part of how you see yourself, how you see reality, how you operate going forward. If rejection revealed misalignment, you integrate that into your standards. If failure revealed a requirement, you integrate that into your capability development plan. If pain revealed a limit, you integrate that into your training focus. The lesson does not just sit as information. The lesson becomes part of you. This step is what creates lasting change. Extraction gives you knowledge. Integration gives you transformation. Because integrated lessons change how you operate automatically. They become part of your decision-making process. They become part of your standard operating procedure. They become who you are instead of just what you know. Step 4. Application. Once the lesson is integrated, you apply it immediately. Not eventually. Not when you feel ready. Immediately. You take one action based on what you learned. If rejection revealed misalignment, you adjust your approach to better reflect your actual standards. If failure revealed a requirement, you take one action to build that capability. If pain revealed a limit, you begin training to expand it. Immediate application. No delay. This step is what prevents the lesson from becoming theoretical. Application makes the lesson real. Application proves you actually learn something instead of just understanding something intellectually. Application is where transformation becomes visible, where internal change creates external difference. Step 5. Iteration. You repeat this process with every negative experience, every rejection, every failure, every pain. You run the protocol. Separation, extraction, integration, application, again and again, until it becomes automatic, until you no longer need to consciously remember the steps, until your default response to anything negative is to process it through alchemy and convert it into something useful. That is the key. Alchemy is not something you do once. Alchemy is something you practice until it becomes your operating system, until you cannot not do it, until the moment something negative happens. Your brain automatically starts the protocol without you having to consciously engage it. That automaticity is what makes you unbreakable, because your system is converting damage into development faster than damage can accumulate. You have a choice. You can continue responding to negative experiences emotionally and letting them damage you randomly. Or you can start running the alchemy protocol systematically and converting every negative experience into power. One approach makes you a victim of circumstances. The other approach makes you an architect of what circumstances create in you. Here is what most people do not understand. Your worst experiences become your greatest advantages. Not automatically, not just because you survive them, but because you process them through alchemy and extracted everything valuable while discarding everything damaging. The rejection that nearly broke you becomes the clarity that directs you. The failure that humiliated you becomes the wisdom that guides you. The pain that almost destroyed you becomes the depth that defines you. But that transformation only happens through deliberate processing, through running the protocol, through refusing to let negative experiences damage you without building you, through treating every difficult moment as raw material that you convert into fuel, clarity, or capability through systematic alchemy. You have a choice right now. There is a negative experience you have been carrying as pure damage. Something that hurt you that you never processed. Something that happened that you never extracted value from. And you have been carrying it as a wound, as proof that life is hard, as evidence that you have been hurt. But you have not converted it. You have not run it through alchemy. You have not transformed it into power. Here is the protocol. Apply the 5 steps to that experience now. Separate the event from your identity. Extract every piece of value it contains. Integrate those lessons into how you operate. Apply one lesson immediately tomorrow, and commit to iterating this process with every future negative experience. That is not theory. That is the complete alchemy framework that transforms you from someone who is damaged by difficulty into someone who is built by it. Here is what happens when you master alchemy. Nothing breaks you because everything builds you. Every rejection refines your direction instead of damaging your confidence. Every failure teaches your next attempt instead of confirming your inadequacy. Every pain expands your capacity instead of proving your limitation. You become someone who cannot be stopped by negative experiences because you have trained yourself to convert every negative experience into fuel. And that is when you become dangerous. Not dangerous to other people. Dangerous to limitation. Dangerous to mediocrity. Dangerous to every excuse that keeps people small. Because while everyone else is being broken by rejection, failure, and pain, you're being built by it. While everyone else is avoiding difficult experiences, you're seeking them because you know you can convert them. While everyone else is trying to minimize damage, you are maximizing development. That is the final transformation. From someone who needs protection from difficulty to someone who uses difficulty as construction material. From someone who is wounded by rejection, failure, and pain to someone who is fueled by it. From someone who tries to avoid negative experiences to someone who extracts power from every negative experience that arrives. Your life obeys what you command, but your life is also shaped by what you can transform. And if you can transform everything, if you have mastered the alchemy of turning rejection into clarity, failure into wisdom, and pain into depth, then your life becomes unlimited by normal standards. Not because nothing bad happens to you, because everything that happens to you makes you stronger. You have commanded yourself to learn the alchemy framework. Now command yourself to practice it daily. Starting tomorrow, when anything negative happens, run the protocol. Separation, extraction, integration, application, and commit to iterating this process until it becomes automatic. That is not theory. That is how you become unbreakable. Rejection, failure, and pain are not your enemies. They are raw materials, and you're the alchemist who decides what they become. Turn them into power. Turn them into clarity. Turn them into fuel. That is the alchemy. That is the secret. Now use it. Now you understand what separates the strong from the weak. It's not that the strong suffer less rejection, failure, and pain. They suffer the same or even more. The difference is that they have learned alchemy. They extract information from rejection without internalizing the wound. They pay the price of failure without identifying themselves as failures. They use pain as information about where to grow, rather than evidence that they should stop. Every rejection you face is leading you to better alignment. Every failure you experience is teaching you what success really requires. Every pain you endure is building a capacity that comfort could never build. But only if you transform it. Only if you stop treating these experiences as things that happen to you and start treating them as raw material that you convert into power. Tomorrow, you will be rejected, or you will fail, or you will experience pain. That is guaranteed. The question is whether you will be hurt by it or whether you will use it to your advantage. The strong use everything as a means of growth. Nothing destroys them because everything builds them up. That is alchemy. That is the secret. Now stop avoiding rejection, failure, and pain. Start seeking the lessons they contain. Start extracting the value they offer. Start building power from the very experiences that destroy everyone else. That's how you become dangerous. That's how you become unstoppable. Now go prove it.